Listen carefully, because what I'm about to tell you was never meant to survive the archives of history. These words should not exist. They are the kind of truths buried under locked vaults, disguised as folklore, erased from records, and ridiculed by those who profit from ignorance. But tonight you will hear it, and once you do, you will not be able to unknow it. In the autumn of 1887, 36 hardened men, trappers, dreamers, soldiers of fortune, marched into the Montana wilderness. They carried rifles, steel traps, wagons heavy with supplies. They carried ambition, and behind them, unseen, they carried death. For months they labored in a valley the maps no longer show, a place that seems to recoil even from memory. And when the snow broke, only 9 emerged. Broken men, starving, haunted, their eyes filled with a terror too large to put into words. The others did not die in the ordinary way. They were consumed by something older than hunger, older than madness, older than mankind. The government said it was hardship, a winter too brutal, supplies too thin, men too weak. They called it delusion, mass hysteria, starvation fevers. The files were sealed, the testimonies shredded, the survivors silenced by ridicule and whiskey until their graves swallowed them. And yet, what if the silence that swallowed the others was not death at all? What if those men were not lost, but claimed? Understand this: history is not a clean ledger of what happened. History is the story they allowed you to keep, and what was erased from the Montana frontier was not a failed expedition. It was the exposure of a door, an opening to something that does not belong here. The man who led them was Captain Elias Vance, a war hero turned exile. His reputation in the West was that of a commander who could impose order where chaos reigned. Men trusted him, men followed him. But those who follow ambitio and into the teeth of the wilderness often find they were never leaders at all, only pawns. And when Vance's expedition drove its shovels into the frozen soil of that valley, they found something meant never to be unearthed: a black stone, older than the continent, carved with shifting glyphs that no alphabet dares resemble. A stone that whispered not to the ears, but to the marrow of the bone. The records that escaped destruction, fragments of a physician's log, a suppressed Pinkerton case file, and the half-mad scribblings of survivors speak of this discovery. They speak of strange hums that crawled into the skull, of tools rimed with frost, though the fire still burned, of animals fleeing, of the silence of forests that should have been alive with chatter. They speak of men unraveling one by one, like threads tugged loose by unseen hands. But here is the truth they buried deepest. What happened in Montana was not an accident. It was not a curse stumbled upon by chance. It was a test. The wilderness has always been a crucible where empires measure what men will endure before they break. But this was something more. A deliberate exposure to forces that fracture the human mind, reshape it, and feed upon it. And it was not the last time such a test was run. Listen closely, because this is where you begin to descend. You came here for a story of missing men. You came here for mystery. But what I am giving you is initiation. When 36 men went into that valley, they believed they were chasing fortune. They did not know they were walking into an experiment. They did not know they were about to stand at the edge of a mirror that does not reflect. They called the place Providence Valley. The irony dripped from the name like venom. On the maps, it was nothing more than a blank space, uncharted forest, cut by a narrow tributary of the Judith River. To the men of the expedition, it was opportunity incarnate: timber for cabins, rivers for fish, hills for game, and most importantly, beaver. Beaver meant pelts, and pelts meant money. They believed they had found fortune's cradle, but some places don't want to be occupied. Some valleys carry the weight of memory, older than bones, older than the soil itself. The work began with precision. Elias Vance commanded them like soldiers. Cabins took shape, a stockade wall rose, and a central lodge was planned as the heart of the compound. This was no mere camp. It was a settlement, an empire in miniature, cut off from the world, ready to endure the coming winter. Morale was high. Dr. Alistair Finch, the physician who had joined to catalog plants and tend to injuries, wrote in his log of the men's vitality, their laughter, their unity. But his handwriting trembles, even in those early entries. He wrote that the men were eager, hearty, touched by Providence itself. but dangerously naive. Because beneath the ground they struck something, not stone, not wood, not bone, something that was not supposed to be there. A rectangle of black material, smooth, glass-like, 10 feet long, 6 feet wide, cold to the touch. So black it seemed to drink the light itself, and etched into it glyphs, not letters, not symbols, not anything born of human hand. Finch wrote that staring at them too long made a man dizzy, gave him the sickening impression of being watched. The men laughed at first, called it a curiosity, a fluke of geology. They joked it was Vance's tombstone, but jokes only hide fear for so long. Captain Vance, ever the pragmatist, ordered them to build over it, to make the slab part of the lodge's foundation. They buried it in the center of their lives. They sealed their fate in stone, and from that moment Providence Valley stopped being a valley. It became a stage, a test, a mirror, and the men were no longer pioneers. They were participants in something much darker. The disturbances began small, whispers almost too faint to notice, tools iced over with frost in the dead of night, though the fires still burned strong. A strange ringing in the ears, first one man, then three, then nearly all who worked near the slab. A low hum no one could describe because it wasn't heard with the ears. It vibrated the bones of the skull. The animals were the first to obey. Birds stopped flying overhead. The chatter of squirrels, the skitter of rabbits, the endless insect drone, all fell silent. Nature itself recoiled from the compound as though the slab radiated a command. Stay away. And then came the changes in the men. Sleeplessness, irritability, the sensation of being watched at all times. A few began sleepwalking, found outside the walls in the morning, barefoot, dazed, unable to explain how they got there. Others grew obsessed, sketching the glyphs in their journals, tracing them on the walls. When questioned, they spoke of shapes that move when you close your eyes, of patterns rearranging themselves in dreams. The German engineer, Klaus Richter, fell hardest. A rational man of mathematics, he became transfixed by the stone. He called the glyphs not language but equations, non-Euclidean geometries that mapped a space overlapping our own. His eyes burned with fever as he scribbled through the nights. He whispered, "It is not a door. It is a mirror that looks back." On the evening of November 21st, he entered the lodge with a lantern. The glow was seen moving about for nearly an hour. Then it was extinguished. By morning, Richter was gone. No tracks in the snow, no sign of struggle. The doors had been barred from the inside. His notebook lay open on the slab, filled with frantic symbols and a single phrase scrawled in German. Die Tür ist kein Tür. Es ist ein Spiegel. The door is not a door. It is a mirror. The first man was gone. The others were about to follow. Morale collapsed. Fear spread like infection. Captain Vance barked orders, but command is brittle when men suspect their leader cannot save them. He swore Richter had deserted, fled into the forest, but every man knew the truth. No one leaves a locked cabin without opening a door, and Richter had not left through any door that men could see. The lodge itself changed. Shadows clung to its corners, thick and heavy even when lanterns burned bright. Objects moved. Small things at first, like a hammer set down in one place and found in another. But then, men began reporting figures, reflections that didn't match their movements, faces behind them in the slab, when no one else stood near. Dr. Finch documented everything, even as he felt his own mind slipping. His log became less medical, more desperate. He wrote of voices whispering at the edge of hearing, promising knowledge, promising transcendence, if only he would surrender fear and step closer to the stone. Snow came early. The valley sealed them in. Provisions grew scarce, and the silence of the forest meant no game could be hunted. The men were trapped in the cold, trapped in the valley, trapped with the slab, and the slab was no longer dormant. One morning, a trapper named Miller was found dead in his bunk, not frozen, not starved. His body was twisted, contorted, as though every joint had been broken from the inside. His eyes were wide open, staring, not at the ceiling, but at something far beyond. The others swore his face bore an expression of awe, not fear. Miller had not been killed. Miller had been taken, and with that, the men realized something horrifying. Survival was no longer the goal. Escape was no longer possible. The only question left was who the slab would claim next. Here is where the testimonies diverge, because not every man saw the same thing. Some claimed the glyphs glowed faintly at night, pulsing like embers. Others swore the stone vibrated, humming like a heart too large for the earth. Some claimed they heard voices, whispering in a language they somehow understood, promising release from hunger, from fear, from mortality itself. But one theme repeats across every survivor's account: the mirror. The slab did not reflect faces, it reflected possibilities. At first, shadows of themselves, distorted and sickening. Then visions, places they had never been, landscapes impossible in shape and size. And finally, presences. Something alive on the other side, something looking back. Dr. Finch's log, recovered years later, breaks here into madness. The handwriting degrades, the entries scatter, but one sentence is written clearly, underlined 3 times. The slab does not show us, it shows what wants us. And the men, cold, starving, frightened beyond reason, began to break into factions. Some begged Vance to abandon the camp, to trek through the snow and risk death in the open rather than remain near the slab. Others argued it was a gift, a doorway to riches beyond imagining, knowledge denied to lesser men. And Vance himself, once iron-willed, began to fracture. He spoke of glory, of empire, of being chosen. He stood before the slab at night, whispering to it as though reporting to a superior officer. The lodge had become a temple. The men had become acolytes and sacrifices, and Providence Valley was no longer a settlement. It was an altar, and if you keep listening, you will stand at that edge too. By December, Providence Valley had stopped pretending to be a camp. It was no longer a community of men surviving the wilderness. It was a crucible, and the slab was the fire. The snow had sealed every exit. Drifts higher than the stockade walls buried the paths they had used to enter. Hunting yielded nothing. Even the game trails had gone silent, as though the valley itself had been cut from the living world. The only food that remained was what they had stored, and even that dwindled quickly as weeks dragged into a frozen eternity. Hunger hollowed their faces, cold cracked their skin, but what destroyed them faster than winter was the growing certainty that they were not alone. Night after night the men heard it, scratching, faint at first, then heavier, bolder. Not on the walls outside, not in the forest. The scratching came from beneath, from under the frozen earth, from under the slab. Some men swore they saw shapes moving in the lodge after dark, tall, spindly shadows that lingered too long, their movements too smooth to belong to men. Others claimed to hear voices rising from the stone, murmurs layered in tones both guttural and inhumanly high, braided together like a chant. Captain Vance dismissed it all as delirium. Yet even as he barked orders, his eyes betrayed him, red-rimmed, fever-bright, locked too long on the glyphs. And then the sleepwalking spread. Men woke to find themselves standing barefoot before the slab, shivering, their hands pressed against the black surface, their mouths whispering words they could not remember. One morning, a trapper named O'Donnell was discovered kneeling on it, his head bowed as though in prayer. His lips moved silently, but his eyes streamed blood. He did not respond to their shouts. They pulled him away by force, but when they did, he screamed like an animal, as though being torn from the embrace of something he could not bear to leave. The survivors would later claim O'Donnell changed after that. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. He simply sat in silence, staring at the slab, waiting. When asked what he was waiting for, he answered in a flat voice, for the mirror to open. By then, the unity of the camp was shattered. Factions had formed. Some begged to burn the lodge, to destroy the slab, even if it meant freezing in the open. Others clung to it like salvation, convinced that if they obeyed whatever spoke through the glyphs, they would be rewarded. They were no longer men. They were believers, and heretics, priests, and apostates, kneeling at the altar of something not human. And Elias Vance, once their commander, once their anchor, became the most dangerous believer of all. His speeches to the men turned fevered, messianic. He spoke of empire, not in Montana, but beyond the mirror. He said the stone was a gift, a door meant for those with the strength to claim it. He swore the weak would be culled, and the chosen would pass through to a place where hunger, cold, and death itself could not follow. The physician's log records one night when Vance stood before the slab, hands outstretched, voice booming as though addressing an invisible army. Finch wrote, "The captain has surrendered. He no longer commands us. He obeys what is inside." And that was when the men began to vanish. It began quietly. One man missing at dawn, his bunk empty, his rifle left behind. No tracks in the snow, no signs of struggle, just absence, as if the earth had swallowed him whole. At first the others whispered that he had deserted, but when the second man vanished and then the third, even whispers died. Desertion leaves footprints. This left nothing. Dr. Finch wrote in his log that the slab had grown hungry. The disappearances always came after nights when the glyphs glowed faintly, pulsing like a heartbeat, casting faint shadows where no light should fall. He described the sensation of being pulled toward it, of the air vibrating with low tones only the bones could hear. Each time a man disappeared, those who remained reported the same dream, standing before the slab, watching their comrades step willingly into its surface and vanish into black water. But it was not only the disappearances. Those who remained began to change. One trapper, McAllister, stopped speaking altogether. For days he sat staring at his reflection in the slab, motionless, unblinking. When the men tried to drag him away, he snapped, biting one of them like an animal, snarling in a voice that did not sound like his own. They bound him, but that night the ropes were found neatly untied. McAllister was gone. The only sign he had ever existed was a bloody handprint smeared across the slab's surface. His handprint, but stretched, elongated, as though the stone itself had warped his flesh into something else. The camp descended into paranoia. Men accused one another of being chosen by the stone, of conspiring with Captain Vance, who now paced like a prophet in chains, his words filled with promises of ascension. "The mirror does not take," he told them, his voice trembling with awe. "It transforms. They are not lost. They are beyond." But the survivors knew transformation was simply another word for annihilation. They had seen the twisted body of Miller, the blood in O'Donnell's eyes, the warped handprint burned into the stone, and yet, deep inside, in the hours of silence before dawn, they could feel it too. That lure, that pull, the whisper that promised release from hunger, from frost, from mortality. Not one man in that camp was free of it. The fractures deepened. A handful of men, led by Finch, swore the slab had to be destroyed, even if it killed them. Another group rallied around Vance, believing destruction was blasphemy, that salvation waited inside. And between them, a third group hovered on the edge of collapse, terrified of both choices, starving, shivering, waiting for the stone to decide their fate. That was when the dreams became synchronized. 9 survivors, decades later, described the same vision, the slab opening like black water, the glyphs writhing into shapes that resembled faces, too fluid, too shifting to be human. They spoke of an endless corridor of mirrors, stretching into infinity, each reflection showing them not as they were, but as something else, taller, sharper, alien, the voice whispering, "Step through, become." It was not a dream, it was an invitation, and one night 5 men accepted it. They walked barefoot into the lodge, silent as sleepwalkers. The others followed, desperate to stop them, but by the time they reached the slab, the lodge was empty. All that remained were 5 sets of boots lined neatly at the threshold, as though discarded before entering a holy place. No doors had opened, no windows had shattered, they had simply gone inside. That night broke the camp. The stone had stopped waiting. It had started choosing. By January, Providence Valley was no longer a settlement. It was a graveyard waiting to be filled. Snow swallowed the cabins to their roofs, supplies dwindled to scraps, and every man left alive knew, though none dared speak, that the valley was not meant to release them. The only question was who would vanish next, and how. But starvation was not what claimed them first. It was each other. The night after the 5 walked barefoot into the lodge and disappeared, the camp fractured completely. Captain Vance gathered the loyalists, men who believed the slab was not a curse but a gift. He called them chosen, and he promised them the world beyond the mirror. His voice had changed, no longer the bark of a commander, but the fervor of a priest. His eyes glowed with fever as he told them, "The mirror is not death. It is the gate to dominion. To walk through is to rise above the chains of men." Dr. Finch and a handful of others opposed him. They had seen too much to believe. They had seen bodies twisted into unrecognizable forms. They had seen men vanish into sealed rooms. They had seen the hunger in the slab, the way it pulled at their very souls. Finch begged them to burn the lodge, to bury the mirror beneath rubble and flame, before it swallowed them all. But the valley was too deep in the slab's grasp. The men were not merely divided, they were weaponized against each other. One night, the division erupted into blood. A fight broke out over the last sack of flour. Shouts turned to fists, fists to knives, knives to gunfire. The silence of the wilderness was shattered by echoes of violence. 2 men lay dead before dawn, their blood steaming on the frozen ground. The survivors buried them in shallow graves beneath the snow. Finch's log notes the horror of that burial, because the ground where they dug was warm. Warm, in the dead of winter, as though the soil itself pulsed with heat. He wrote, "The valley is alive. It eats what we feed it." After that night, the compound was no longer bound by discipline. It became a war of attrition, Vance's zealots against Finch's dwindling band of skeptics. Each side kept watch on the other, rifles always near at hand, waiting not only for hunger to take them, but for betrayal. The slab thrived on it. The glyphs seemed brighter, more fluid, as though fed by violence. Some nights the lodge shook with a resonance no man could endure for long. The sound was not thunder, it was a chant, deep and inhuman, vibrating through the earth itself. Men clamped their hands over their ears until they bled, but still the hum worked its way into their skulls, into their dreams, until they woke gasping, staring at their reflections in the slab. And Vance had become something else. He stopped eating. He stopped sleeping. Yet his voice grew stronger. His body did not weaken. He spent hours before the slab, his lips moving in prayers no man could understand. When his followers begged him for food, for hope, for escape, he only pointed to the stone and whispered, "Through there, salvation awaits." The valley had claimed him entirely. The survivors would later insist this was the turning point, not starvation, not the cold, but the moment when Vance stopped being their captain. He was no longer a man. He was the mouthpiece of something inside the mirror, and when the first of his loyalists offered himself willingly, kneeling before the slab, pressing his face against the glyphs until he was pulled silently inside, it became clear Providence Valley was not a trap. It was a harvest. By February, the snow was not the enemy. Hunger was not the enemy. Even death was no longer the enemy. The true enemy was choice, whether to resist the slab or surrender to it. And in the end, nearly all of them chose. The camp imploded in fire and blood. Finch's final surviving pages describe chaos. Vance's followers dragging men into the lodge at night, binding them hand and foot, offering them like sacrifices to the mirror. Some were pulled inside, others broke apart. Their bodies left in the snow, contorted beyond recognition, their faces frozen in rapture, not terror. Finch wrote, "They do not kill, they transfigure. What returns to the snow are the remnants of those who resisted." By then, the lodge no longer felt like wood and stone. The survivors claimed the walls breathed, expanding and contracting like lungs. Shadows rippled across the surfaces where no fire burned, and the slab itself began to pulse, slowly, rhythmically, as though it was alive, as though it was waiting. Then came the night the mirror opened. The 9 who would live to tell the tale, barely, spoke of it only in fragments. The glyphs blazed with light, brighter than fire yet darker than shadow. The surface rippled like water, reflecting not the men but a world of towering figures in endless corridors of glass. The chanting filled the valley, a sound too vast to come from any throat. Men fell to their knees, some weeping, some laughing, some clawing at their own eyes. Captain Vance walked into it first, without hesitation. He vanished, his form swallowed whole. His followers followed him one by one, until only the skeptics remained, the broken men who would stumble out of the wilderness months later, half mad, half dead, clinging to the hope that what they had seen was illusion. But illusions don't leave claw marks on wood. Illusions don't leave notebooks filled with equations no man should write. Illusions don't break 36 men until only 9 crawl out alive. The authorities buried the story. They called it hysteria, delirium of the starving, madness of the snow. They burned the journals, locked away the case files, destroyed the names of the dead. They made sure the valley was erased from maps. They thought silence could protect the world. But silence is not protection. Silence is permission. And now you know. Now you see the truth they tried to erase. There are places where the world is thin, where the ground hides mirrors that are not mirrors at all. There are doors meant never to be opened, yet men open them anyway. Men like Vance, men like the investors who funded him, men who are still funding expeditions, still testing, still searching, because what waits beyond is not myth. It is not folklore. It is power. The 9 survivors? They lived, but they never escaped. Each of them was marked. Dreams haunted them until their graves. Some swore they saw their reflections moving differently in mirrors. One hanged himself, leaving behind a single note. It's still waiting. And here I must turn to you, because you did not come here for entertainment. You came here for truth, and now you have it. You cannot go back to ignorance. You cannot unhear what was hidden. This is your initiation, so listen closely. If you would prove that you are awake, if you would prove you see the mirror for what it is, comment this phrase twice below to seal it in your mind. The mirror does not reflect me. I reflect it. Write it twice. Burn it into your identity. Because in a world of illusions, words are not decoration. Words are chains. And this phrase will either bind you or set you free. The men of Providence Valley are gone, but the slab remains, waiting, watching, whispering. And now you carry the burden of knowing. Do not let the silence take you. The official story ended with 9 broken men stumbling out of the wilderness, but the truth never ends. Those 9 lived, yes, but not as they once were. Their testimonies were incoherent, shattered mosaics of horror. They contradicted themselves, contradicted each other. One swore he saw Captain Vance crowned in light, leading an army of shadows. Another claimed the slab whispered his true name, a name he had never known. A third broke down screaming when he caught his own reflection in a basin of water, convinced the face staring back was not his own. Doctors dismissed them as delusional. Pinkerton agents took notes, then buried the case. The investors pulled strings, sealed files, erased maps. Because that is what power does when it meets something it cannot control. It smothers the truth until only whispers remain. But whispers outlive stone. For decades after, hunters reported strange silences in those hills, forests without birds, rivers without fish. Trappers swore they heard humming at night, vibrating through the trees. A prospector in 1913 claimed he saw a black surface beneath the snow, etched with patterns that seemed to move when he blinked. He vanished the next winter. His camp was found empty, boots lined neatly at the threshold of his cabin, and yet the story is still dismissed, still ridiculed, because that is how the silence is kept alive. If they can make you laugh at it, they can make you forget it. If they can make you doubt it, they can bury it again. But you have heard it now, and if you hear it, you carry it. Understand this. The men of Providence Valley were not victims. They were not unlucky. They were chosen. Chosen to be tested, chosen to be consumed, chosen to stand before the mirror and see whether they would kneel or resist. And you, listening to this now, you have been chosen in the same way. That is why you feel it, that vibration in your chest, that tension in your skull, that gnawing awareness that the world is not what it seems, that there are doors buried beneath our history, doors we were never meant to open, yet someone keeps opening them. The mirror does not reflect us. It reflects what wants us. And when men are weak, when men are starving, when men are desperate, they listen. They obey. They step through. So remember this. The 9 who survived were not spared. They were witnesses, carriers, messengers of something too vast to describe. And whether you believe or not, whether you laugh or dismiss or try to bury this story in your mind, the mirror has already seen you. It has already reflected you. The question is not whether it is real. The question is whether you are strong enough to face it. Because one day, when the silence falls heavy, when the birds vanish from the sky and the air hums with a rhythm you feel in your bones, you will know. You have found the valley, you have found the slab, and the mirror will be waiting. And when that day comes, remember the phrase, speak it, own it, twice. Seal it in your mind before it seals you. The mirror does not reflect me, I reflect it. This is not entertainment, this is not folklore, this is initiation. Now you carry the burden of knowing, and the silence is watching.